Hey guys, tonight we slip under a swaying lantern into a lane that smells like wet wool and wood smoke, where shutters blink and the cobbles remember every cart that ever rattled over them. You keep your hood low and your heartbeat lower, because this is the hour when trades are made in whispers, and you're about to accept one that pays mostly in trouble. The light puddles on the stones like spilled honey. Your shadow lengthens, thins, and tries to quit the job before you even start. You move anyway, careful, steady, toward a doorway with a signboard painted for the illiterate, a boor that has forgotten what a boor looks like. Inside, ale hums, dice clack, and your stomach tries to negotiate hazard pay. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love watching our sleepy map glow, city by city. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You slide onto a bench that lists like a tired boat. The man across from you is nobody with excellent posture. He doesn't say, assassinate. He says, prevent interference, settle inconvenience, remove complication, as if you're a broom with opinions. The coins he shows are real enough, small, bitten, a little jealous, but his promises arrive wrapped in fog. Payment now is a taste. The meal comes after, if it comes at all. You're learning the first rule of this trade. The math is all risk and little coin, calculated by someone who'll never pay interest on your skin. Mainstream fact to anchor us. In many late medieval towns, curfew bells signal watch and ward, after which gates are shut or guarded and streets are patrolled by the night watch. You don't hear that bell yet, but you feel it in your bones. A timetable that makes every plan shrink to fit between strikes. The patron prefers you act before compline, if possible, which is his way of saying he wants speed without mess, certainty without cost, and deniability with receipts. He describes the target like bad weather, present, damp, and ruining people's hair. Beard like a haystack that lost the argument, a scar over one brow shaped like a bent nail, a habit of sneezing at pepper and then swearing off it forever until lunch. He usually prays at lauds, often meets a guildsman before noon, and always changes his mind. Your task is to turn usually into a map and always into a door. You're not a shadow. You're a clerk taking notes with your nerves. You keep your voice soft and your gaze softer, because in a room like this the walls have ears, the floor has rumors, and the barmaid has a memory that outperforms most monks. Quirky tidbit as you sip. Tavern floors are often strewn with rushes or herbs like rosemary and mint to sweeten the air. Good for odor, tricky for footprints. Every step crackles your presence like a letter you'd rather not read aloud. The talk circles, never lands. The man's name is a secret that even he seems reluctant to know. He places a hand on the table, palm down, as if to bless the wood, and mentions a procession tomorrow. Banners, candles, the sort of holy crowd that behaves like a river with elbows. He says it offers cover. You think it offers angles and witnesses. Historians still argue whether the word assassin was born from a rival's slur about hashish, an internal nickname, or simply a frightened elite naming what they didn't control. You don't have an opinion. You have a clock. You negotiate in the way people negotiate when the other person owns both the pen and the paper, by asking for clarity and receiving poetry. If you succeed cleanly, the coins will double. If you fail noisily, he has never met you. If any hint points back to him, he will be outraged at your unprofessionalism. You stare into your ale and find a future floating there. Headlines in the town square that double as indictments. Neighbors deputized by law to chase any suspicious face. A scaffold that looks like a disagreement solved by carpentry. You breathe slow. Ordinary is your armor. Your disguise won't be a costume so much as a commitment to being boring. Cap with a point that sags like an apology. Tunic the color of yesterday. Shoes that squeak only when the world is loud enough to swallow them. A small knife because big knives have opinions. A short wedge of cord because clever knots ask fewer questions than long speeches. Keep the kit simple. The more you carry, the more you confess. A serving boy sets down a bowl of stew. It is brown, as medieval stew often is. It smells like comfort with a little barn in it. You eat because hungry people make noisy mistakes. The patron eyes your hand, and your hand doesn't shake, which is encouraging. He talks about making it look natural, a fall, a misstep, a sudden sleep. You talk about options that prefer patience to theater. You ask about tasters. He waves you off with the confidence of a man who has never been asked to season a cover story. You agree on a mark that isn't a name. 3 taps on a table at a certain alehouse the day after. The door creaks as you rise. The night receives you like a damp envelope. The air tastes of chimney and iron. Somewhere a watchman knocks his stave on a stone and sings out the hour to prove he's awake. You try to slip between the notes. You walk the long way home, counting turns, glancing at window leads where candle flame warps into squares. You practice the slow breath of someone with no appointments. You do not run, because running is a declaration. You do not linger, because lingering is a petition. The rented room greets you with a mattress stuffed with ambition and straw, a shutter that leaks starlight, and a crack in the plaster that looks like a river deciding where to go next. You sit on the edge of the bed and lay your tools out. Knife, cord, patience. None of them shine. The only sharp thing tonight is consequence. You don't sleep yet. You take stock of what the city will do to you once the bell speaks. When metal rolls across the rooftops, the town closes like a hand. Gates heavy, bridges cinched, alleys suddenly on the same side. One shout can braid neighbors into a lawful net. The old hue and cry turns every doorway into a pair of eyes. The picture dries your mouth. To make it through the night, you must be seen by no one and remembered by less than that. A strange little prayer, but a useful one. You lie down anyway. Above you, the beams keep their own chronicle. Scorches from some past mischief. Small notches where a previous tenant hung hopes to dry. In the corner sits a tiny cloth sachet, lavender tucked there by the landlady, a charm against nightmares if you want one. You smile, file the kindness for later, and let the room grow quieter than your thoughts. Sleep arrives in the staggered way of a drunk who keeps choosing the wrong door, out, in, out again, until, at last, you slide under and stay. By then, dawn is already at the threshold with cold water and a list. The morning smells like damp stone and yesterday's stew, and you rehearse the contract you don't have. Your fingers find the 3 coins he advanced. Test bites at their edges leave the same old dent in your confidence. There's no parchment, no wax, no tidy sentence beginning, "Let it be known." There is only breath turned into promises and then released to the weather. You're supposed to trust that breath. It evaporates nicely. You know why he kept it oral. Words unrecorded travel light. If you're taken, the story becomes a simple shape. A wicked blade, a righteous crowd, and a villain who forgot to be fictional. The patron's name never appears, because it never appeared. He will be outraged to learn of your existence, the way the sky is outraged by rain. His deniability isn't a shield. It's a hole he steps through while you learn gravity again. Mainstream fact to anchor the room. In many medieval cities, especially in Italy, people who wanted binding guarantees used notaries and seals. Documents were folded, witnessed, and sometimes written as chirographs. Two matching copies cut with a jagged line so only the true halves reconciled. You get none of that. Your agreement is a rumor shared between two lungs. No seal, no witness, not even the dignified violence of a wavy cut. You inventory the mechanisms that might have made this safer. A letter of protection? Too official. A tally stick? Too public and too funny for murder. Split wood with matching notches that says, "Yes, we bought peas." A signet imprint? He would need to risk a ring, and men like him don't risk jewelry unless it flatters their hands. Instead, you're offered the oldest collateral, my honor, which in this context is a goose dressed like a guard. The broker who introduced you, the one with the watery eyes and the talent for being nearby, swears by the patron's reliability. Brokers always do. Their business model is confidence on commission. If you succeed, they are a genius. If you fail, they were at prayer. You study his face for tells. The way he says, absolutely, as if the word owes him rent. The way he talks about the last man who took care of a complication and then went on a pilgrimage so long no church has yet reported him finishing it. You press for terms you can carry in your pocket. Half now, half later. He offers you a quarter now and poetry later. Safe conduct if things go sour. He offers you friends at 2 gates. You have met gates. They don't have friends. What about a deposit held by a neutral party? He suggests a monk who owes him a favor. You imagine confessing through a grill to discover the monk also owes the city a few explanations. Historians still argue whether the spread of written contracts and civic courts reduced reliance on private violence in the late Middle Ages, or whether the paperwork simply learned to look away at strategic moments. Your experience this morning votes for paperwork with poor eyesight. You glance down at your knife, not much of a negotiator, and think about the patron's risk calculus. If you're caught, torture makes confessions blossom like spring. Under that pressure, names tend to fall from mouths the way apples fall from shaken trees. The authorities prefer the fruit that's easiest to pick. Yours. Patrons float above the orchard line. The scaffold loves a body. The court loves a neat case. The crowd loves a story with one villain and a moral that can be shouted. Your nameless employer loves all of that very much, from a courteous distance. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind while you count coins. Some merchants end their contracts with pious formulae. As God is my witness. And it's not just morality. It's muscle. Invoking the sacred increases the social glue. Violating the terms then stinks of perjury against the divine. In this arrangement, the only divine name in the room is the one the patron uses when the stew is too salty. Your deal has a theology of convenience. You are the liturgy. He wants you to keep it natural, which is to say, he wants a performance where the world plays accomplice, stairs that misjudge a foot, a horse that invents a stumble, wind that invents a shove. You explain gently that natural often demands planning so meticulous it ceases to feel natural to anyone involved. He nods the nod of a man who thinks orchards grow pies. When you suggest waiting for a pattern, 3-day rhythms, market habits, he winces as if patience owes him money. He outlines the payment handoff. 3 taps at the alehouse tomorrow evening. You're back to the beam, the barmaid to look the other way. You note how every safeguard he names is also a knife for your throat. If he wants you gone, that's where he can play surprise. You imagine choosing a different spot, a different hour, a different bartender's mood. It's not that you distrust him, it's that you trust his incentives. The more you examine the deal, the more it becomes a bowl with a hole at the bottom. You can keep pouring effort in, and for a time, it will look full. Then, when you need it, the contents have quietly traveled somewhere else. You consider asking for a token, something small, personal, pawnable, so that his skin joins yours in the bargain. He offers a pin with a saint on it. The pin is inexpensive. The saint is busy. You decline. You think about what fail-safes you can design for yourself. A second broker who doesn't know the first. A backup rendezvous that only you know. If the hue and cry catches your scent, a plan to reach sanctuary. Limited protection in some churches, though even that is a negotiation with men who count politics alongside sins. You won't write any of this down. Ink is a gossip with eternal memory. Instead, you repeat the plan until it occupies your mouth like a prayer. The city yawns into midday. The procession banners are being unfurled in courtyards you can't see. Somewhere a tailor stitches a hem with blue silk that doesn't forgive mistakes. You take the long way to the market, not to shop, but to measure how your face lives among others. The fishmonger glances and forgets you, which is promising. The old woman selling onions gives you a look that says she met you in another life and disapproved then too. Normalcy is a performance scored for glances. You practice the rests. One more complication. Deniability runs both ways. If the patron tries to cheat you, what court will hear your complaint? Your Honor, I killed the man exactly as orally instructed. The judge will recommend a different career path followed by a short rope. Above your head, a raven corrects the morning with a sound like a hinge. You remember the lavender sachet in your room and the superstition the landlady attached to it, that it keeps bad dreams away. Perhaps you'll stitch a sachet of your own with cloves and stubbornness. At least those are cheap. Back at the inn, you mark the 3-tap table with your eyes. You note the warped floorboard that complains under the heel, the hinge that says here with a sigh, the window that sees the street but also sees you. The barmaid polishes a cup with the solemnity of a priest. She sees more than she tells. You ask after the stew, and she says it's better when you're hungry, which is a mission statement for many things in this town. On your way out, you cross a small group of guildsmen debating cloth prices with the heat of philosophers. Their dispute flicks a thought across your mind. Price is a story 2 people agree to tell. So is blame. You will be paid in maybes. You will be blamed in full. The contract you can't prove was always designed to fit perfectly inside a courtroom, where your hands are suddenly very interesting to everyone. The street receives you the way a ledger receives debts, quietly, without applause. You walk and keep walking, letting your pace settle into that unremarkable rhythm you've been practicing since last night. A tune so ordinary the city hums along, not noticing it's your song. The job begins where the promises end. The promises ended before breakfast. You dress like you're apologizing to the horizon. The tunic you choose is the color of yesterday, matter dyed to a tired brick that doesn't ask for compliments. The hood is plain, its long tail, liripipe, trimmed so it won't swing like a flag declaring, "Interesting person here." You thread your belt not as a flourish, but as an afterthought, hang a cheap knife in a cheap sheath, and tuck a little pouch for coins and patience. If invisibility has a price, it's paid in boredom. The trick isn't to look poor or rich. The trick is to look catalogued, already filed by every eye that passes over you. Mainstream fact to steady the mirror. Medieval towns and kingdoms had sumptuary laws, rules about who could wear what colors, furs, or fabrics, especially in the later Middle Ages. Enforcement varied, but the idea was simple. Clothing should signal status. You obey that grammar tonight. No squirrel fur, vair. No bright scarlets that shout, "Dyer in love with your coin." No long dagged sleeves that dance in corners like gossip. You are a paragraph of plain prose in a city that admires footnotes. The room smells faintly of your landlady's lavender sachet and a history of stews. You arrange layers with priestly care. Linen shirt against skin, wool tunic for warmth, hood for the wind, hose that make walking a negotiation, and shoes soft enough to learn a new rhythm. You rub a little tallow into the leather so they go quiet. You test the soles on the floorboards. One creaks a confession. You swap it to the foot that touches down when the street is loudest. This is the science of unnoticeable. Not escape artistry, just timing. You check your pockets, then remember pockets are mostly a modern habit. You use a belt pouch. A quirky tidbit wanders in right on cue. People often pinned pilgrim badges, tin or lead alloy tokens from shrines, onto hats and cloaks. They were proofs of piety, souvenirs, and sometimes fashion. You fish out an old badge shaped like a little scallop. You don't plan to pretend you've walked to Compostela, but a hat with a story buys a second of goodwill from strangers. You pin it to the hood's edge, not for attention, but for category. Pilgrim adjacent, boring addition. Now the body. Clothes can whisper. Gait shouts. You practice a pace that suggests you've been late before and didn't enjoy it. Your shoulders live at a middle altitude, neither hunched with guilt nor broad with threat. Your eyes do the local dance, brief touches. A nod that says, "I recognize your type," then away. Carry your weight like a bundle you have carried all your life. Those who glide get remembered, those who stomp get remembered, those who thread the needle become civic wallpaper. Historians still argue whether most people really stared less in public than we imagine, whether medieval streets were so social that eye contact was routine, or whether strangers truly stood out the way they do in small towns now. Either way, you err on the side of the shrug. You cultivate the art of existing exactly as much as the street permits, and not one grain more. A cough here, a mutter about the price of onions there, and suddenly you belong to the choir. You try on accents the way you try on hats. Not too much. The best disguise is a pronunciation that walks instead of performs. You file the edges off your vowels, give them a mild country echo, then sand it down further. You add a little garlic to your breath, not as a weapon, just as a history. Smell is biography. You write yours in ordinary ink. At the wash basin, you consider the beard. You trim it into the shape of someone who owns neither a mirror nor an opinion. Too neat is suspicious. Too wild is memorable. Competence lives in the shaggy middle. Your hair gets the same treatment. a compromise between monk and salt marsh. A scrape of dirt under the nails reads as labor. A smear of soot on the hood reads as chimney proximity rather than alibi rehearsal. None of this is theater if it's the sort of theater no one pays to watch. You lay out tools again and make them even smaller. A narrow knife, because a broad blade argues with the air. A cord that disappears under belt and hem. A wax stub for doors that love to squeal. A folded rag for hands that forget they're supposed to be calm. You handle them until your fingers stop noticing their shapes. Then you put them away. Night carries better when hands are empty. A man holding nothing is a blank line. A man holding something invites the eye to read. You test your silhouette in the shutter's spill of light. No dramatic angles. Your shadow shouldn't look like an opinion. You shift the knife from hip to back so it's not bullied into view by the tunic's pull. You bend, straighten, bend again. Watch for betraying bumps. The city can inventory you in a glance. You make sure the inventory says rope, turnip, obligations, not odd bulge where reasons go to hide. A thought about fabrics, bright blue, woad, wants to be noticed. So does fine black, a status color when dyeing got good at darkness. You accept dull brown and gray like you're signing a treaty. You roll a thread between finger and thumb and listen. Wool does talk, if you've done this long enough. It says, I can pass a gate without commentary. There's a debate you host privately while tying laces, livery or not. Households put their men in colors to shout allegiance, useful camouflage if you can steal the right hue, fatal if you pick the wrong lord on the wrong street. You decide against it. Borrowed glory turns to paperwork faster than stew turns to story. Better to be the kind of person who owes his style to laundry day rather than to a banner. Time to walk. On the stair, you rehearse the sound of your own weight. In the corridor, you practice the little delays that make you forgettable. Letting someone pass with a soft hand to your belt pouch. Nodding at nothing in particular. The universal liturgy of not a threat. Outside, the air smells like iron and dawn. You grip the world at its blandest point and squeeze until even the dogs decide you're a rumor. You make for the market because that's where bodies warm up the day. Barrels thump, geese compose letters to the editor, and a baker slaps dough with the confidence of a man who's never feared a knife. You drift near a stall of rough linen, touch the cloth the way a buyer does, quick pinch, approving grunt, and move on. You stand by a cart long enough to look like you were always standing by that cart. This is the discipline. You keep choosing the option that leaves no story behind you. A carter curses because a wheel remembered a rut. You lend a shoulder as if you've always lent shoulders. The man nods, calls you friend, and immediately forgets you. Success. This is not acting. It is subtraction. You have removed from your presentation every hook that would catch on someone's curiosity. One more inventory before you drift toward the church square where the procession will later form. Finger your pouch. Coins, wax, rag. Touch your belt. Not secure, cord hidden. Breathe. Your ribs expand to exactly the diameter of someone who never expects to be noticed. The lavender sachet you didn't mean to like peeks from the tunic's edge. You tuck it in and smile at yourself. Small comforts aren't disqualifying. Panic is. You carry lavender and the possibility of not needing it. If there's a prayer for your trade, it's not about protection or easy roads. It's a petition for plausibility. May your steps be the ones people stop seeing first. May your face be where attention refuses to land. May your knife, if it must, be the footnote, not the headline. And may your shoes, tallowed and quiet, remember the choreography when the bells start telling the city to look for a story, and you insist on being prose. You begin by borrowing a life that isn't yours. Not stealing. Stealing would be decisive. Borrowing is softer, patient, and more annoying. You follow the man's mornings from a distance so careful it feels like prayer with bad posture. He leaves his door the way a habitual sinner leaves church, resigned, with a plan to try again tomorrow, and you take note of the small choreography. Left glove pulled on with the teeth, right glove slapped against the thigh twice, a glance upward to test the weather's mood. Your memory becomes a ledger. Gestures on one line, places on the next, excuses on the third. Bells help. Mainstream fact, steady as stone. Urban timekeeping in the later Middle Ages ran on church bells marking the canonical hours, prime, terce, sext, none, and on civic bells for curfew, fire, or assembly. The city's throat sings what clocks will someday whisper. Your target tends to move at terce, unless he's late, which he often is, which is useful except when it isn't. You set your breath to the bells, not because you're devout, but because your feet need a schedule that won't write you letters of complaint. You shadow from the edge of sightlines, corners of timbered houses, under eaves that weep a little when the world is damp, behind carts that travel exactly as fast as your patience. You give him a generous lead, and then trim it like a gardener who understands hedges and gossip. A left turn by the bootmaker. Signboard. A giant boot that could house a small family. A pause at the well where women throw their news in with the pails. A quick detour to a stall selling pepper he claims he's sworn off. Your ledger adjusts. You're not a cat. Cats make it look elegant. You're an accountant with sore legs. At the market cross, you take your place like scenery. A fishwife scolds a mackerel. A cooper tests a hoop with a listen-ahead ear. A boy runs messages for a penny he will keep for ribbon rather than bread. You fade into the drift and watch how your target greets the world. Men who believe they're important salute space before people. Men who are actually important nod in ways that make space behave. Your man is somewhere between a salute to a space that doesn't quite salute back. He talks to a guildsman who smells faintly of woad, blue dye and stubbornness. You learn faces by their fragrances because your eyes can lie, but garlic doesn't. You collect places he likes to be forgetful. A baker's stall where he just remembers to sample. A scrivener's bench where he just recalls a letter that needs answering but never gets written. A bench near the church porch where he just happens to overhear things in the company of other just-happeners. Historians still argue whether medieval literacy in towns climbed as fast as city records suggest, or whether a small reading public did a lot of heavy lifting for the rest. Either way, your man treats written words like a game played by other people's hands. He does his reading with ears. You do yours with footsteps. Quirky tidbit, folded into the day like an extra crust at the edge of a pie. Some parishes raise money by hosting church ales, friendly drinking fundraisers in the churchyard. If you need to overhear without standing out, a church ale is a choir where nobody cares if you can't sing. You mark the next one on your inner calendar, right after the slot labeled survive. If your man attends, he'll attend loudly. It isn't all routine. Some days he buys onions, and the city remembers for hours. Other days he detours down a lane that pretends to be a lane, and then becomes a disagreement between houses. You hate those. Lanes like that decide who you are, and they usually decide you're corner-shaped. He pauses to talk to a barber surgeon whose pole, white, red, sometimes blue, promises both haircuts and the courage to hold still. You keep walking, because stopping would turn following into standing next to, and standing next to is how stories start. You map the churn of his habits onto the city's own habits. Market days, busiest at mid-morning. Guild meetings, lively at dusk. Feast days, processional traffic jams with candles. You also map the watch. You learn who patrols which ward at which hour, whose lanterns swing low, whose dogs are gossips, which doorways conceal not lovers, but the people lovers eventually marry. Your patience is an animal on a short lead. You feed it with restraint, because a lunging patience becomes a panic fast. Every now and then the target looks back, not at you, not even at your type, but back at the day to check if it's still on his side. You happen to be exactly where a person with errands would be. That's not luck, that's rehearsal. You practiced pauses in mirrors. The way your shoulders slouch when you listen to the price of cabbage, the way your face brightens for a moment at the sight of pears you won't buy. You perform a conversation with a cobbler's window. The cobbler isn't there. The window is generous. He ducks into a tavern you don't like. It has the wrong geometry for leaving quietly. Entrance too narrow, other door too visible. Kitchen a dead end with knives that belong to the cooks. You mark it in the ledger with a skull drawn in patience. You give him 5 minutes and then follow for a look. Ordering ale with the seriousness of a bishop and a cup. The air is thick with steam and brine. The floor's rushes advertise last night's choices. You stand near a pillar, the way you've taught yourself, and find the reflection of the room in a polished pewter dish. He laughs with his head back. He rarely laughs. You write that down too. People are patterns with punctuation. Laughter is a comma you didn't expect. Outside again, you complete the square. Tavern to street, to workshop, to churchyard to street. He stops to watch a procession practice, a rehearsal of banners so the saints won't trip on their own cloth tomorrow. You keep your distance, because rehearsals are small and attention is unemployed there. He whispers with a man whose cloak says money and whose shoes say committee. You try to file the face, but the hood makes a story of its own. You file the shoes. The day thickens like stew. He wanders to the bathhouse, which you resist following into. Steam makes eyes confident and fingers curious. You buy a sprig of mint from a girl who can't be older than your regrets, and chew it to give your breath something harmless to do. Your lavender sachet, remember, the landlady's small sorcery against bad dreams, sits where you pinned it inside your tunic. It reminds you not all disguises are tactical. Some are kindness. You allow yourself one. There are moments when your patience wobbles. He takes a sudden interest in geese, who repay him by contributing opinions to his shoes. He vanishes behind a cart just as the cart decides to reenact a minor landslide. He stops to talk to a spice seller about cinnamon with the gravitas of a man redistributing a kingdom. Your feet hum protest, your stomach files a complaint. Your mind wanders to the choreography of your shoes and whether they deserve a raise. You call yourself back. Drifting is for boats. You need rudders. Late afternoon, he turns down a lane you've never walked. It's dark early there, the houses leaning toward each other like conspirators. A boy kicks a dried clod that was once something alive and now is useful as a toy. You slow to let a widow with a basket pass between you and the target. Your silhouette becomes two silhouettes, and then none. He stops at a door whose threshold has been repaired by someone with more hope than skill. He knocks a rhythm you don't know. A face appears, and the door decides to stay in opinion. You count heartbeats to 60, and then to 60 again. You mark the door, the chip in the beam, the sound the latch makes when it changes its mind. This is where detours turn patience into panic. The map in your head doesn't have room for improvisation, but the man does, and he uses it like a borrowed cloak. You breathe. You review your exits like a litany. If he emerges left, you drift right and rejoin at the corner. If he emerges right, you accept the blessing of being wrong and let him go, rather than turning the street into a theory about you. The bell at none stirs the pigeons. The door doesn't open. You lean against a wall, the way an idea leans against a page. When at last he reappears, he's lighter by a worry or heavier by a plan. You can't tell which. You log the uncertainty too. Evening prepares its ladder of shadows. He tracks back toward the square with the confidence of a man who has just been convinced by himself. You rethread your distance, settle your step, let your shoulders find the middle altitude again. Laughter spills from a doorway. Bread exhales. The city puts on its nightshirt. Your ledger, heavier now with motion and maybes, closes like a book taught not to brag about what it knows. Dusk puts its hands on the city and squeezes. You feel it in the streets first. How they stop being paths and start being funnels. All attention aimed toward doors that know your name and doors that intend to learn it. The bells loosen a low rope of sound over the rooftops, and men with staves begin their slow geometry, dividing the night into pieces they can count. You shorten your stride by a breath, tuck your hood, and let your heartbeat listen for the schedule you can't see. Mainstream fact, sturdy enough to lean on while you adjust your laces. Many towns in late medieval Europe ran watch and ward. When the curfew bell rang, householders were expected to bank their hearths, streets were patrolled by night watch, and gates were shut or guarded. It wasn't an apocalypse. It was administrative bedtime. But bedtime for a city means your freedom wears a smaller hat. Bridges sprout chains. Posterns learn the word no. A gate that smiled at noon now practices frowns in the mirror. You drift toward the east gate, not to leave, just to test its mood. The warders' silhouettes look like doorways with opinions. One tips his head to a merchant with a tally stick and a face that says legitimate reasons, then frowns at a boy carrying nothing but optimism. Your optimism is at home in a drawer. You keep walking, because loitering is a word the night watch likes to conjugate out loud. The calls start up. A watchman knocks his stave on stone and sings the hour in a tune that never quite met music. He names the weather too, because that's part of the ritual. Past 9 and a fair night, or past 9 and a foul, as if the sky needs the minutes to feel official. The announcements aren't for romance, they're a promise. Someone is awake to notice what shouldn't be moving. You count escape routes, and the number is small enough to memorize by accident. Every lane now has a witness, a shutter that breathes, a dog with municipal ambitions, a neighbor who waters gossip more faithfully than herbs. Curfew doesn't empty a city. It concentrates it. Sounds arrive brighter. A hinge that whispered at noon clears its throat at night. You roll the wax stub between thumb and forefinger and promise it a promotion if it can teach one troublesome latch how to keep a secret. A quirky tidbit flickers in with the lamp smoke. Curfew may recall the French couvre-feu, cover the fire. A hearth lid or iron pan you drop over embers so the house doesn't wake to a sermon from the flames. In some places it's a real object with a handle. In others, just a household habit with a name that sounds like a parent. You imagine a city tucking itself in, one ember at a time, lids going on like sleepy hats. Bells have dialects. Fire alarms ring in patterns. Assembly calls ring in pride. Curfew rings in something like a father's throat clearing. You listen, because bell codes can be a map if you learn the grammar. Some parishes answer another's alarms by echo, like neighbors finishing each other's sentences. Historians still argue whether uniform bell codes existed across whole cities, or if every parish improvised, trusting ears to know danger when they heard it. Tonight, your ears know danger as anything that sounds like more people than you. You slide through a narrow close where laundry ropes bow like polite lines on a page. Up high, a woman pins a cloth that looks like a small flag surrendering to the night. The alley ends at a postern door in the wall, useful by day, doubtful by now. You've seen the keeper here trade smiles for pennies. After curfew, he trades smiles for last names. You keep your coins and your name. Somewhere behind you, a cat invents a sermon of its own and converts two other cats immediately. The river edge is worse. The bridge that welcomed carts all afternoon now wears its chain like an idea somebody should have disagreed with earlier. The water speaks in the voice of cold promises. You find the ladder you memorized, 3 rungs rotten, 1 good, and decide you will not use it unless you are on fire, and the fire has paperwork. Even boats are suspicious now. Ferrymen know the hour, and the hour charges extra for strangers. Better to be a person who forgot bread than a person who remembers boats. Night watchmen are not soldiers, not exactly. Some carry bills, some cudgels. Many carry a desire to go home before dawn with their stories still inside their ribs. They ask you the ritual questions if they don't already know your face. Name? Dwelling? Business? It's social theater with a legal hat. You have rehearsed your answers. Name plain enough to forget, dwelling near enough to point to, business dull enough to bore. You even practice the shrug that says, I also dislike the price of salt. The right shrug is a passport. You angle across to the square by the Guildhall. Lamps puddle warm light under eaves, and a clerk locks up a chest with keys that want to tell their grandchildren about it. In some towns, the ward mote, local neighborhood meeting, appoints who will carry those keys and who walks which beats. You remind yourself that a city isn't an enemy. It's a group project. You just chose a role nobody wants on the poster. A boy runs past with a basket in the speed of a rumor. A woman hauls a slop pail like an argument with gravity. A man tries to whistle and discovers he's forgotten how. Every sound has a face at this hour. You adjust your own. Less cheekbone, more forehead, a sketch you could draw with 3 lines. Your knife rides higher now, tucked where it doesn't suggest itself to imagination. You test a theory, that being accompanied by an object makes you make sense. You pick up a short bundle of kindling from a stack near the cooper's yard. Arms occupied, you become errand returning home, the safest species after dark. It feels like a costume, but it reads like a sentence that ends with a period instead of an ellipsis. At the north gate, a small negotiation is underway. A miller insists he must pass. The porter insists the miller must wait until morning. The miller produces a sack to prove sincerity. The porter produces a yawn to prove hierarchy. You note the tone. This isn't tyranny. It's inertia. Gates close because they are supposed to. And opening them requires a story with names in the right order. You walk on because you haven't been assigned a name worth ordering. Above, a shutter opens the width of a book and then closes as if the page were disappointing. You tuck into a doorway to let a patrol pass. They smell of lamp oil and a kind of tired that can't decide if it's noble. One man carries a horn and looks personally offended by silence. He blows a test note that startles a pigeon into reconsidering its life. You remain the color of the wall. You imagine how quickly a single wrong footfall becomes a chorus. One shout becomes 10. 10 become the ward, and the ward becomes the city's favorite hobby, being awake for the right reason. All your planning compresses into a few truths. After curfew, movement must be justified, not merely executed. Every step needs a witness who doesn't mind you having taken it. The streets offer fewer ways out, and each is plausibly guarded by someone's cousin who likes to tell stories. If you must move, you move on rails, the routes you rehearsed in daylight, the hinges you bribed with wax, the corners that consent to your existence. When you finally angle toward your rented room, the stair groans like a relative with news. Inside, the lavender sachet waits where you left it. Small mercy, modest charm. You set the kindling by the hearth you aren't supposed to wake and blow a careful breath over the embers until they glow like thought. The city outside is the size of a fist now, and you live in the space between the fingers. Tomorrow, the bell will open the hand again. Tonight, you stay thin. You lay the tools out on the table as if you're negotiating with stubborn children. Knife, cord, a compact bow that swears it's discreet, wax, rag, a few pins, a little vial that smells like apothecary and regret. None of it is magic. The knife sits there with the honesty of metal. The cord coils itself into innocence. The bow, more gadget than weapon, pretends to be a miracle wrapped in wood. You touch each piece and let your fingers remember what your nerves will try to forget. You start with the knife because everyone does. Not the big theatrical kind. No hero's sword, no butcher's blade with opinions, just a narrow rondelle dagger, triangular in cross-section, built for thrust, not for storytelling. Mainstream fact to ground your expectations. By the later Middle Ages, the rondelle and the basilard are common sidearms. The first is a spike meant to find seams, the second broader, useful and showy. Yours is the quiet cousin. You press its point against a folded scrap of old gambeson, wool and linen stitched into a patient pillow, and feel how the fabric eats energy like a saint eats praise. Your knife will work, but only if distance, angle, and luck audition and get cast. You consider where the world keeps its soft places, and then remember the world is inconvenient. Cloaks, doublets, and padded jacks turn sharp intent into chores. Under a tunic, men wear mail or brigandine more often than folk songs admit, and even a layer of heavy wool can turn a confident thrust into a disappointing anecdote. You practice the grip that keeps your wrist in a line your bones approve of. The floorboard under your left foot creaks, the same one you meant to move yesterday, and you add housekeeping to your list of accomplices. The cord is a simple coil of hemp with a knot that looks like you're trying too hard. It wants to be decisive. You don't. Garrots aren't a default solution in a place where a shout recruits half the street and a struggle becomes public theater in one breath. Even cloth, a scarf, a belt, can pull a life into silence, but only if the choreography is perfect, and your shoes have been very clear about their relationship to perfection. You run the cord through your hands until it reads as rope, not as excuse. Quirky tidbit to fold into your caution. Some folk will spit on a blade or knot and mutter a charm before work. Salt on steel against rust, a whispered psalm against luck's bad manners. Your landlady's lavender sachet peeks from your tunic. You decide it's as close to a charm as you'll permit. The pocket crossbow lies there, all ambition and short limbs. It's no battlefield arbalest. It's a street trickster, quick to hide, slow to earn respect. You crank its tiny windlass with more patience than pride, and feel the string complain like old rope asked to remember youth. Historians still argue whether such small devices were common in towns, or mostly curiosities, useful at snake range, dangerous mostly to hope. You test the bow's draw against a scrap of leather and a slab of salted pork you bought for supper, and then didn't eat. The quarrel sticks. The leather is unimpressed. You file the bow under, maybe if the wind helps and the saints are bored. You clean the dagger, out of habit, and because pork smells like honesty. Wax goes to hinges that gossip. Pins go where the city's clothes come undone. Your kit remains humble because humble passes gates. Mainstream fact with the weight of a bylaw. Many medieval towns restricted the carrying of certain weapons, especially loaded crossbows within the walls. Watchmen liked questions answered before quarrels flew. A dagger on a belt is one thing. A cocked bow is a conversation you won't enjoy. You decide the bow stays home unless the plan becomes theater, and you become the stagehand who sabotages the curtain. You inventory failure points because they're the only points that volunteer. Blades slip, cloth catches, hands sweat. People move like people, which is to say, wrong. A knife needs space, space needs timing. Timing needs a city that cooperates, and the city has other plans. You practice a motion that belongs to ordinary life, adjusting a belt, straightening a sleeve, and hide a different motion inside it. If you look like a man who has learned to tie knots, no one assumes he learned for unkind reasons. Think about distance. A blade is a promise satisfied at arm's length. A cord is a promise that argues first. A bolt is a letter that misreads its address if the street sneezes. You walk the room and practice angles that make windows your friend and corners your alibi. You grip the dagger ice pick and then hammer. Feel the difference in your forearm in the future. You mark with chalk, then rub it away, because chalk is a kind of confession if anyone else can read. There's a debate only you can hear, and you let it talk itself tired. Do you chase certainty? More gear, more gadgets, more ways to improvise? Or do you chase plausibility? Less to hide, fewer noises, smaller footprints? You choose the second path because the first comes with a suitcase and a spotlight. You remember the watchmen singing the hour, the bridges wearing their chains, the ledger of routes you built from daylight. All those things argue for tools that fail quietly. If you must choose between noisy success and quiet failure, the knight prefers the second. You prefer neither, but you've never been the knight's favorite. You reach for the little vial, not poison. Poisons like to cheat on their dosages, but a sleep tincture that might convince a dog to reconsider its career. A whisper on meat, a friendship offered to a Gates four-legged secretary. It smells of poppy kissed by cheap wine, and a lecture from a cautious priest. Historians still argue whether assassins leaned on drugs much at all, or whether most potion stories are enemies' inventions and playwrights' gifts. You cork the vial anyway. Tools that do nothing are still tools if they calm your hands. You run a last drill. Foot falls on the stair at your chosen cadence. The door learns to keep its voice down with a smear of wax. The knife rides where cloth doesn't announce it. The cord sleeps in the belt pouch. The bow sulks on the table and learns humility. You sit and listen to the house explain itself. Timber speaks old weather. Plaster hums drafts. The hearth gives a small amen. Your shoes remind you they were choreographed yesterday and prefer the same routine tonight. Failure deserves its own rehearsal. If the first motion stumbles, cloth too thick, angle untrue, you practice the second that looks like the first was a nothing. A turn to cough, a shoulder to the wall, a hand to steady yourself against a beam that once steadied somebody braver. If the hue and cry yawns awake, your body needs a sentence to say that makes sense. Home, sick, water. One syllable is better than two, because fear steals consonants first. You gather the tools back into the pouch and let ordinary reclaim the table. Knife vanishes. Cord becomes twine. Vial is a pilgrim's comfort. Wax is for candles. Pins are for rent clothes. Nothing here wants to be special. Nothing here wants to be caught in a story. You practice saying your name in the tone of someone no one ever remembers, and then you say nothing at all. Tools promise control. The city counters with wool, mail, and alert eyes. If you win, you will say the tools did it. If you survive, you will say boredom did. You flirt with poison the way a sensible person flirts with a cliff, by describing it from a safe distance and then stepping back. On parchment, poison is quiet, elegant, civilized. It asks no crowds to witness. It leaves no puddle for a watchman to point at helpfully. In practice, poison belongs to kitchens, and kitchens are small republics with more politics than a parliament. If steel is a one-act play, poison is a 5-course dinner where every course has an opinion about you. The door from yard to buttery inhales you into warmth and noise. Knives behave like metronomes on the board. Ladles ring against iron. A junior cook recites orders under his breath as if scripture. Mainstream fact anchors your caution. In larger medieval households, the food chain is a hierarchy. Steward over stores, butler over drink, pantler over bread. Cook over fire, and sometimes a cupbearer or taster for the Lord's table. The point isn't flavor, it's control. Every step adds a witness who could notice your hands making the wrong weather in the wrong bowl. You bury your knife deeper and make your face learn the expression, I belong to errands. You watch how food moves. Flour becomes dough in a trough older than you. Dough becomes loaves that a pantler blesses with stamps. Loaves cool under a linen that remembers stories. Ale comes up from the cellar with the dignity of a river. Wine is counted like confessions. Meat lives by the hearth, grave and aromatic. Pottage murmurs on its own schedule. Any plan that touches these flows must do so without ripples, because the cooks despair of physics, but are connoisseurs of ripples. The vial you brought stays corked. Poisons like arsenic, aconite or hemlock live in your imagination as tidy powders that mind instructions. Reality sends rain, steam, and bad timing. Dose too small, nothing happens but suspicion. Dose too large, something happens too quickly, and the story writes your name in all caps. Add to that tasters, men, or sometimes boys, whose job is to be courage with a palate. In a hall that can afford them, they sip and wait the longest minute of the day, while everyone watches their face for theater. You do not like theater. There are workarounds, and they're worse. Slip a tincture into what only the target touches. His spice dish, his favorite brew. the pair he hoards like a small moon. That requires intimacy with his habits and proximity to his fingers. You get one of those. Both are expensive and paid for in luck. And luck is a currency that refuses to make change. You study the rhythm of trenchers, those thick bread plates that soak up stew. Notice how the most important mouth gets the freshest cut and the least interesting bread. And understand that to poison a lord through his trencher is to poison a loaf that 40 people have opinions about before it reaches him. Quirky tidbit glints on a hand passing you. A ring set with what the wearer calls a toadstone, believed by some to detect poison by sweating or warming. Others swear by bezoar stones dropped into cups, or by unicorn horns that are, upon closer inspection, narwhal tusks with a rich fantasy life. A pearl in wine, a rooster's feather dipped and watched. Tests scatter across Europe like folk songs. None of them frighten you. All of them slow you down. Slowness is a problem because kitchens measure time in steam and catastrophes. Historians still argue whether medieval poisonings were truly common in towns, or whether many poison deaths were foodborne illness, metal-leached cups, or rumor doing its favorite job. They also disagree about arsenic's availability and use before the early modern inheritance powder era. Your position in the debate is extremely practical. If people expect poison, any illness with narrative potential becomes your fault. Silence is loud when listeners are ready. You shadow the butler for a while and learn a truth about drink. Barrels have biographies. Good casks are named like horses. Bad casks are cursed like weather. The butler tastes from a spigot, smacks lips, nods numbers to himself, and scribbles with the authority of a small kingdom. You picture your tincture surfing that river and realize it would need to pick a single cup out of a choir and sing louder somehow, in a room that hates solos. Another path is private. Pass through a servant, the quiet sovereign of a single plate. Bribe the hand that sets the spoon. Sweeten the word that empties the salt cellar. But every accomplice is a witness who can change sides at the speed of fear. A coin now becomes a confession later. If caught, they sing. If not caught, they raise their price until your purse develops a personality disorder. You prefer risks you alone can ruin. You wander toward the pastry corner because pastry encourages hope. Subtleties, those edible sculptures of sugar and almond, are the theater wing of the kitchen. The master reveals a mock castle. The room applauds. Knives arrive. Sugar in this century is often treated like a spice or medicine, precious and disobedient. You imagine dusting a torrent with calamity and feel the hall fill with suspects. Poison loves a private audience. Subtleties schedule a matinee. You try to imagine a clean path anyway. Suppose you dope only the pepper he insists he's sworn off. A pinch into a personal horn, closed and set back just so. That requires access to the table before he does, and access means eyes, and eyes mean names. Suppose you doctor the cup he prefers, pewter with a dent like a fingerprint. The cup lives in a cupboard. The cupboard lives in a room. The room lives in the memory of the under-butler whose hobby is remembering. You make a mental note. In future lives, choose trades with fewer cupboards. Sometimes kitchens are useful for something else. Listening. Cooks hear more policy than councils do. While scrubbing a pot to look helpful, scrubbing is a category anyone can enter. You overhear that the Lord's cousin is sick again, that the almoner is late, that the procession route tomorrow was altered because of scaffolding near St. Mildred's. That last bit matters. It redraws your map and makes a corner into a choke point. You leave with no poison in your hands, and one dangerous fact in your pocket. As you step into the yard, the geese hold a committee meeting about your ankles. You negotiate by committing to diplomacy and speed. The vial remains corked. You've learned something sharper than any spike. Quiet plans are loud if they pass through noisy rooms. If you fail with steel, the city sees a struggle. If you fail with poison, the city sees a mystery and appoints committees until your rumor develops an afterlife. You walk the long edge of the wall where the kitchen's warmth thins into night, and you rehearse the reasons you won't be a chemist tonight. The job wants tidy invisibility. The world offers steam and extra witnesses. Tasters stand between a table and your intention. Servants multiply your liabilities. Barrels require a theology. You let the plan shrink back into the vial, and the vial shrink back into the pouch, and the pouch shrink back into you. There are quieter ways to use kitchens, building routes, borrowing aprons, learning who owns which key, but poison isn't one of them. Not for you, not tonight. Your shoes remember their choreography. The lavender in your tunic remembers to forgive. The city remembers everything else. Silence will have to come from timing, not from tinctures. You slip away before the pots can learn your name. The city decides to dress up and give you access. It also decides to count you while it does it. Processions look like invitations from far away. Banners, torches, saints riding shoulders, choristers who couldn't whisper if paid in pepper. But when you step close, they're corridors with walls made of people. You move to the church square early, because early is the only time crowds resemble soil you can plant yourself in. The verger barks at apprentices stringing a garland that wants to be a serpent. A clerk checks a list with the gravity of a judge. You fake being part of the scenery by helping someone tie a knot. Your shoes remember their choreography and do not volunteer opinions. Mainstream fact to lean on while you calibrate. Urban processions in the later Middle Ages, Rogation days, guild parades, Corpus Christi, ran on scripts. Guilds marched in rank, each with its banner, sometimes with pageants or living tableau. Parishes took their turns. Civic officials occupied places that announced hierarchy as loudly as trumpets. This is choreography, and choreography hates improvisers. You will have to dance without stepping on a saint. There's a checkpoint no one wrote down. Women with baskets judging whether you belong. A fishwife stares at your hands as if they're a recipe. A baker's boy bumps you twice and tells you nothing you need to know. At the church door, an usher insists that knives longer than sensible must wait outside. You produce your narrow rondel in its honest sheath and look penitent enough to pass. The usher's eyes are busy with a burlier argument. 2 people down. You keep the blade. You lose a little luck. You promise not to make either obvious. You scout vantage points the way a cat scouts sunbeams. The porch offers height but also visibility. Windows give angles but also witnesses with opinions. Bottlenecks tempt but remember names. You settle into the second row of a crowd near a corner where the procession will slow to avoid scaffolding. Remember the kitchen gossip? St. Mildred's repairs turned an easy curve into a negotiation. A good choke point for a shove that looks like weather. A bad place for a blade that looks like intention. You mark the bodies around you. A man with a pilgrim badge in pewter. A scallop kin to yours. A girl with a posy of rue and reasons. An old woman who mutters an inventory of everyone's sins as a public service. Torches shoulder nearer. Wax drips onto everything that can remember heat. Quirky tidbit. Fragrant and stubborn. Some processions throw herbs, rue, rosemary, meadowsweet, into the path, sweetening the air and sanctifying the root. People keep sprigs for luck. You tuck one as a decoy in your sleeve, next to the lavender sachet that now smells like it made a new friend. The choir passes, not quite together, earnest enough to make togetherness unnecessary. The guild of skinners with their banner, the fishmongers in caps that argue with wind, the candle makers glowing with a pride that can be measured in tallow. Your target enters the square as if arriving were an accomplishment, which, to be fair, it is. His cloak sits wrong on his shoulders. His hat has chosen vanity over weather. He takes a place near the alderman, the sort of nearness that pretends to be coincidence. You let the crowd push you forward half a shoe and then take that half back. A weapon check won't catch your knife if your hand never invents a reason to touch it. There's theater everywhere. A child dressed as an angel remembers he is a child and scratches his nose with divine authority. A drummer tries for solemn and finds enthusiasm. The reliquary glints, carried like fragile thunder. If a plan were to ride any of this, it would be the reliquary's pause at the corner, the ripple of bodies as weight shifts and shoulders argue. But the corner has a personality today, narrowed by scaffolding, bossed by a foreman who regrets rope. And a foreman's regret is an enemy to improvisation. You inhale the crowd. People smell like liturgy. Wax, wool. Breath warmed by hymns. You test a shoulder bump with the man in front who accepts it the way a tree accepts wind. You test a lean and get a glance that reads you into a sentence. Man, present, probably here for the spectacle. You need to remain that sentence until the one heartbeat when you are not. Historians still argue whether crowds in medieval towns were more suspicious or more neighborly toward strangers, whether community meant a net or a knot. Today it's both. Net for you if you err, knot around those who belong. The pageant cart grinds to a halt, a little drama of gears and prayer. An actor angel forgets a line and relies on wings. Laughter skims the surface and then settles into reverence again. Your target leans to see. You lean to not be seen seeing him. The alley you scouted last night opens like a purse mouth, then closes with a delivery of barrels. The balcony you considered fills with 3 ladies who have decided the day is theirs. The porch pillar you loved grows a deacon. The city edits your plan in real time with a cheerful pen. Weapon checks get stricter near the feast. The steward at the hall door recognizes trouble the way hounds recognize rabbits. He glances at belts, bulges, and hands pretending they don't have hobbies. You pass on the strength of looking like you'll complain about the salt. Inside, trenchers glow with heat and anticipation. The room's geometry does not forgive. Long boards, benches packed, a dais that watches the room the way a hawk watches a field. You ghost along the wall, offering to carry a pitcher you never pour. Public ritual compacts time. What would normally be an hour becomes a series of counted crescents. Prayer, process, pause, hymn, plate, cup, pause, plate again. Opportunities must map to the pauses, but pauses are full of eyes. The target laughs once, the same head-back punctuation you saw reflected in pewter, and reaches for bread with a hand that trembles less when the room agrees with him. You could imagine a stumble near the dais step, a misjudged distance, a polite catastrophe. But dais steps sit under a cloud of attentions. The hue and cry would begin before gravity finishes its work. So you build exits instead. In the churchyard, you memorized how the choir peels away after the final hymn. At the hall, you note which servants own which door and which doors own which noises. A cluster of guildsmen returns to the square for fireworks that are really torches. You flow with them for 3 breaths and learn where their laughter forgets to count heads. You are not going to win a fight here. You are going to win a decision to be somewhere else when the room needs a villain. The procession reforms for the return. Banners ripple backwards like a river remembering its source. Your target has eaten pride dressed as pottage, and now radiates the sort of satisfaction that makes men trip. The corner by the scaffolding offers itself again, but the foreman has adjusted ropes, and a squire has parked himself like a punctuation mark exactly where you would need the sentence to break. You let the moment pass, the way you let other men pass, with a nod that looks like patience and tastes like iron. Quirky street theater near the end. A hobby horse darts through, squealing, part of some guild's traditional comedy. Children shriek, adults pretend disapproval, coins appear from nowhere. The horse nearly bowls your target, and then misses by the width of a sigh. An opening? No. Openings that call your name are usually trying to learn how to pronounce you. You stand still and let a small miracle not happen. When the torches thin and the saints return to their boxes, the city exhales. You memorize how the square empties, who stays to sweep, who stays to gossip, who stays to count. You drift along the edges and let false options drain away. Public ritual gave you proximity and a diagram of attention. It also put you in a ledger with 10 witnesses per heartbeat. Steel would be theater. Poison would be a committee. Accident would be an insult to carpenters. You keep your knife quiet. You let your shoes do what they do best. Translate intention into distances that don't look like intentions at all. By the time the last bell folds the day, your arms remember carrying a pitcher, your sleeve smells like rosemary and wax, and the rue in your cuff presses a small, cool promise into your wrist. The trap wasn't for your target, it was for your impatience. You step out of it and back into the unglamorous lane where tomorrow's plan is already starting to mutter. The first shout is not about you. It's about a purse and a hand that didn't belong together, and a woman who owns a voice like a bell. Stop, thief! Turns a corner and finds you anyway. The street pivots. Faces become arrows. The watchman's stave learns geometry against stone. You do nothing, and the city does everything. The hue and cry has a center you can't see, and a radius that now includes your rib cage. Mainstream fact to hang on to while your breath forgets arithmetic. The hue and cry, formalized in England by the Statute of Winchester, 1285. Obligated neighbors to pursue suspects on sight. Failure to help could be fined, and whole hundreds might be immersed if a criminal wasn't produced. Other towns had variants. Bells, horns, shouted formulas, binding by law and habit. What matters to your shoes? One shout deputizes a neighborhood, and deputized neighbors love a purpose. The watchman blows his horn, a sound like a cow learning opera. Windows unlatch into eyes. A guildsman points with the certainty of a man who enjoys pointing. You shift one pace to become less interesting, but attention scans and sweeps, not dots, and your cloak's wrong-fold volunteers as evidence. The thief is already sprinting, bless him for being so helpful, and for a heartbeat the street mistakes your intention for his. You move because stillness now is a confession, and motion, if you do it right, is a sentence that ends elsewhere. The pattern unfolds like a lesson everyone remembers. Someone yanks a rope. A ward bell yammers above the lane. And the sound bounces off timber and plaster until it sounds like 5 bells multiplied by fear. A butcher's boy with a cleaver decides he is part of history and gives chase. 2 dogs join because dogs are monarchy when it comes to emergencies. A porter at the nearest postern starts closing it with the slow pleasure of a man turning a page he wrote. Your carefully plotted exits redraw themselves into jokes with bad timing. You cut left toward the cooper's yard because lath and hoop smell friendly, but the yard is already a conversation about suspects, and you have the wrong face for innocence. You let yourself be jostled, a bump that steals your balance but gives you a new sentence to say, mind. And then you are 3 bodies deeper into the crowd, where every second man has an opinion about your elbows. The lavender sachet presses a small calm into your chest, as if to say, this is why I came. You consider thanking it out loud, then remember you are not collecting quirks today. Quirky tidbit floats in like a scrap of ribbon caught on a nail. Some towns kept handbells or murder horns for exactly this ritual. Some parishes had specific ring patterns for pursuit versus fire. There were even hue and cry formulas, words you were supposed to shout, naming the crime and commanding aid as you love the king. Whether your neighbors love the king is debatable. They adore shouting. The formula today is simpler: noise, hands, rumor, motion. You bounce off a cart that used to be a quiet church on wheels and is now a barricade with theological aftertaste. The carter lifts his goad like a question about your ancestry. You pivot, keeping your gait in the register marked late but polite, because sprinting marks you as thesis, not footnote. A boy points and declares you fast, which is both compliment and problem. You slow a half-beat and let the tide pull past. The actual thief, 3 eager amateurs, a dog who believes in you. Sanctuary pulses at the edge of your map like a lit window. The church porch. You could run for it, mouth full of Latin you don't own, and negotiate with a priest who counts politics alongside sins. Historians still argue whether sanctuary protected violent offenders reliably, or whether kings and councils chipped away at it in practice. Abbots had muscles, sheriffs had friends, and exceptions walked around calling themselves rules. What you know is this: a porch is a trap with incense if the crowd decides it should be. You ease away from the idea like you're easing away from a dog with a thesis. The bell's echo lures a gateward to his rope. Chains on the bridge clink in a sentence that ends with no. You wanted to be a rumor sliding out under the city's door. The city offers to keep you as a bedtime story instead. You shift toward the tanner's lane because the smell screens everything. It keeps secrets by insisting there are none. And your eyes water into plausible deniability. 2 apprentices block half the alley, each carrying a vat and the conviction that space belongs to them. You mutter pardon with the authority of a man who's carried heavier things. They move because your tone has a memory of work in it. Bless rehearsal. A staff catches your sleeve, not a strike, a question. Name, dwelling, business. The watchman is shorter than your fear and twice as real. You give him the name you practiced. The street that can point at you, the business that bores. Sticks, for the fire. He glances at your bundle. The props department you invented yesterday saves your ribs today. He scowls toward the noise, does quick math, and decides you are administrative, not exciting. He lets you pass with a look that says he will remember your forehead if nothing else. You slide along the wall, keeping your shadow shallow, and feel the hue and cry move like weather. It has fronts, a hot edge where fists find air, a cooler middle where speculation writes letters to itself, and a tail where people discuss what they would have done if they weren't busy. You keep to the tail. Your shoes execute the choreography you paid boredom to teach them. Your knife stays an opinion no one asked for. The thief, May his future include softer shoes, bolts down the lane you mapped 2 nights ago, and discovers what you already learned. It is an argument between houses that ends in a door pretending to be a continuation. He climbs and loses. The crowd climbs and wins. The hue and cry gets its prize, and the prize screams a story that will include 3 wrong names, one of which might be yours by breakfast if you've been generous with your face. You turn your head so your nose becomes someone else's profile. Another bell answers the first, not in unison, but in the civic dialect you've been studying. Fire? No. Pursuit? Assembly? Only if someone upgrades the drama. Your hands stop sweating because your body has decided dry palms are stealth. A woman thrusts a torch into your near space. You take it because refusing work is also a confession. And now you are help, walking at the necessary speed of competence. You carry flame like it's your job and watch for a corner where your job changes. The corner arrives as a barrel delivery argues with gravity outside the vintners. The crowd pauses to avoid being part of a lesson about momentum. You use the pause like a craftsman. Torch to a younger arm with a mind your sleeve, then a step behind a stack of staves, then a bend under a lintel that has met many foreheads. The alley beyond is quiet in the way of places that haven't yet been told what the hour is for. Your breath gets ideas. You tell it to wait. You don't run. You edit. Pace reduces from italic to plain. Shoulders unlearn adjectives. Face returns to the expression that says you've recently considered the price of onions. The hue and cry recedes, not like a sea, but like a song finishing the verse you didn't care for. Your lavender sachet finds your pulse and calls it by its name. 2 streets on, a baker closes his shutter with a squeak that files itself as north exit second option. You buy a heel of bread you don't want because purchasing is camouflage, and crumbs are the natural byproduct of innocence. He grumbles something about curfew and trust. You grunt something about soup and winter. You are again a citizen. The city will remember tonight for a week. It will remember a thief who ran, a crowd that hunted, a watch who blew a horn badly, a boy who will someday turn this into a story where he was faster. It may remember a face like yours if you give it any reason to. You won't. You'll walk your diagram back to the room with the straw mattress and the crack in the plaster that has chosen to resemble a river. You'll bank the hearth, even if no one is watching. You'll thank the bundle of sticks for its service to your biography. You learned what you needed. A single shout can slam a city into formation, shrink exits to postage stamps, and herd you toward the worst ideas. Bells don't have to ring for you. They only have to ring. Your plan for tomorrow just became smaller, lighter, quieter. The next move must look like no move at all. You know what happens if you fail loudly. The street is a throat, the bell is a tongue, the watch is a jaw, the law is teeth that like to meet. You do not imagine it in crimson. You imagine it in paperwork and planks, in ropes and lists, in sentences read aloud by men who are proud of their handwriting. The story the city wants is tidy. A villain, a motive, a moral. You are easy to cast. The patron is not. Mainstream fact to stand you upright while the room tilts. Across much of medieval Europe, confession is the queen of proofs. On the continent, Roman canon procedure grows an inquisitorial spine. Magistrates question, collect depositions, and chase full proof. In England, after 1215, when the Fourth Lateran Council effectively ends trial by ordeal, juries and presentments take more of the load. Compurgation and ordeal fade. Written records fatten. In both worlds, a confessed story, preferably neat, ideally named, Oils the machine. The machine prefers its oil volunteering. If you land in custody, the first room you meet isn't a dungeon, it's a desk. A clerk writes your name and then spells it 3 other ways, just in case one is guilty. He asks for your craft, dwelling, and company, words that sound harmless until company becomes a rope that ties you to men you never met. The watchman who brought you in stands by, rehearsing the hero version for his friends. A magistrate looks at you the way a carpenter looks at a bent board, useful only if corrected. They ask for your story, not the true one, the useful one. Who sent you? What did they promise? Where can we find them? They already know the answers they like. The enemy faction, the rival guild, the awkward nephew with the ambitious jaw. You could swallow your patron's name and let it turn to stone. Stone is heavy. Fear is heavier. You ration your silence and hope it buys more than it costs. There is a room after the room. Historians still argue whether routine judicial torture was as widespread as modern imaginations paint. Usage varied by place and crime, with civic bylaws, royal decrees, and ecclesiastical courts drawing lines they then smudged. Only for grave crimes. Only with prior evidence. Only to confirm what we already strongly suspect. Phrases stacked like caution signs at the top of a hill. The hill is slippery. You have seen what happens to caution signs in weather. They show you implements the way hosts show a guest the new kitchen. Cords, wedges, frames, tools with moods. They say, "We hope not to use them," and they mean it the way the sky hopes not to rain on laundry day. Your body is a choir that can sing only one note at a time. Pain is a conductor who dislikes improvisation. You count cracks in the beam and try to make numbers into armor. Quirky tidbit to pick up like a pebble and turn in your hand. Some places pay the executioner a civic salary and a bit of the market, fees for weighing bread, for clearing carrion. And he often wears red on workdays, partly tradition, partly brand. He's a professional with side hustles, a municipal contractor whose office is the edge of things. Children stare. Adults pretend not to. He's not the man you fear tonight. He's the man you might meet if the clerk's pen grows legs. They prefer confession, and will help you prefer it too. A little tightening here. A little persuasion there. A sermon from a man of God about the salvation value of truth. You want to tell him truth is currently hiding under your ribs and refuses visitors. The magistrate is economical. Names, places, times. The clerk's quill flirts with the parchment like it intends to marry. You give them weather instead of addresses, and the weather does not satisfy. On the bench, 2 elders trade theories about your motives like pastry. Hired by the other ward, in league with foreigners, paid in foreign coin, envy, devil. It would be funny if it didn't fit you like a suit you never asked to wear. They discuss your demeanor. Too calm is guilt, too trembly is guilt, silence is guilt wearing a fashionable color. A boy peeks through the door, collects a lifetime anecdote, and disappears. When confession arrives, by surrender, by persuasion, or by your imagination finally tired of standing guard, it arrives with stage directions. You sign if you can write. You make a mark if you cannot. The clerk writes for you if you can do neither. A confession has a dignity the truth rarely earns. It enters the record, which is to say, it enters memory with a wax seal and a seat. Your patron's name does not sit down. Names like his prefer balconies. There's theater after the desk. The scaffold isn't merely a platform, it's a pulpit with a different sermon. The crowd arrives early because this is a civic event, market plus morality play. Stalls do brisk trade in pastries and opinions. The crier reads the charge with the voice he uses for festivals. A priest stands near, tasked with saving the correct part of you. The rope waits with professional patience. You are expected to say something. The something should help the city learn. The city has specific lessons in mind. Mainstream fact, because the air needs anchoring. Gallows and beheading places lived at city margins, the Tyburns and gibbets, the greens and gates, chosen for visibility and jurisdiction. Bodies might hang as warnings, heads might be displayed where pigeons became law's co-counsel. The aim is memory. Not your memory, their memory of what not to do and whom not to cross. You are a sentence the town repeats until it forgets who wrote it. They like it best when you confirm the story they purchased. Yes, you were hired. Yes, by that faction. Yes, you were wicked. Yes, you repent. Mercy sometimes comes in the form of speed, and speed is the coin you bargain with. You would like to argue footnotes about curfew bells and watch lists and scaffolding near St. Mildred's, but the scaffold does not permit Q&A. Odd commerce happens at the margins of theater. A rope's offcut might be sold later as a charm against illness. A chip of the gallows post becomes a talisman. The executioner gets tips if he's quick, jeers if he's not, favors from those who want to be on good terms with the future. Your future is shorter than a sermon. You try to make a shape of it anyway. Something your mouth can say that doesn't harm anyone you haven't already. The part of you that keeps ledgers does the cruel math. The patron walks away a story the city cannot write down. You remain a sentence it loves to copy. In Chronicles, if you appear at all, you'll be a certain man, or a servant of wicked men, an actor without a program note. Historians still argue whether executions were more carnival or catechism, moments of rowdy market pleasure or structured ritual meant to knit order out of fear. The truth refuses to pick a team. It depends on the day, the town, the weather, the bread. If you are very unlucky, they will ask you to name names. If you are only ordinarily unlucky, they will assume the names you failed to produce. They will engrave them on rumor and nail them to the month. Your patron will sponsor a candle somewhere and sleep well. The rope will do what ropes do. The clerk will add a flourish to his final letter. The priest will commend your soul to a place that has no watchman. The crowd will go home to stews and stories and the comfort of being in the audience. You walk yourself through this picture because fear prefers outlines. Colored in terror is less useful. You note where the theater needs you and where it doesn't. You decide, again, to keep your story small enough to hide under a bench. You commit to choices that stay beneath clerks and quills. And if the day comes when you can't, you practice a sentence with only weather and regret in it. Nothing that teaches a balcony to speak. The city believes in lessons written large. You believe in not becoming handwriting. Your plan grows another husk of caution. Fewer allies, fewer gadgets, fewer opportunities for someone else's pen to discover you interesting. You leave the court in your head and return to the room with the lavender sachet and the knife that doesn't tell stories out loud. Tomorrow you'll need to pass near the hall again, but as furniture, not as plot. Cold has a way of editing your courage. It trims sentences, pairs gestures, files hope down to a smaller, more portable size. Your room is not large, but winter makes it feel honest. The plaster smells faintly of damp lime and lavender that has been working overtime. You bank the hearth with thrift, because wood is a coin that burns. The cough that's been flirting with you decides you're interesting. It tests your ribs and finds them cooperative. Hunger writes marginalia in your stomach. You listen to your breath the way a clerk listens to a confession and try to keep the story short. Mainstream fact to steady your hands while they fumble with flint. In the medieval Christian calendar, fasting and abstinence days are common. Lenten tire, ember days, vigils, Fridays, shaping what people ate and when. For many, that meant pottage and bread more often than meat, fish when rules and means allowed, and collations that pretended not to be meals. You live on the patient foods, barley that forgives, onions that insist, ale that apologizes. Hunger doesn't make you noble, it makes you noisy. You bite a heel of yesterday and decide nobility is overrated. Your bones notice the drafts before you do. The shutter leaks star-cold around its edges. The door has opinions about the concept of closed. Smoke from the hearth rolls up, finds no proper chimney, and negotiates with the roof instead, the way many houses still do. It leaves a seasoning on rafters that looks like time in a black suit. The air is a compromise between warmth and air. You choose warmth until your eyes protest, then choose air until your fingers stage a walkout. This is the physiology of caution. You can't plan if your joints write counter-arguments. Fatigue goes shopping in your thoughts and buys the delicate items first. Your timing phrase. Your hearing improves exactly where it shouldn't. Footsteps in the lane, a pot settling its grammar, a neighbor's whisper turning into a theory about you. You rehearse the easy lies again. Name plain, dwelling near, business boring. You whisper them into the lavender sachet as if it were a clerk. It accepts without comment. Prayer is nearby too. Simple ones you learned sideways from other people's lips. Lines that ask not for victory, but for a pause button. You don't kneel so much as lean, the way tired people do when piety and furniture meet halfway. Quirky tidbit arrives wearing a wool cap. The landlady swears by warming ale with a beaten egg and a scrape of nutmeg to hush coughs, the posset as medicine and dessert. She also recommends a slice of onion under the pillow to pull the cold out by its ears. You try the posset because it tastes like a plan. You skip the onion because your pillow already owns several biographies. She clucks and adds a sprig of rue to your sleeve, for virtue. Rue and lavender share the space like polite cousins. Hunger invites superstition. You avoid ladders, because carpenter's jokes are not your preferred obituary. You touch iron when you pass the latch because the blacksmith told you iron remembers. You knot your cord twice instead of once because it feels like competence, and competence is a spice that improves everything. Historians still argue whether most people in these centuries slept in two distinct phases, first sleep and second sleep, with a wakeful watch in between. Your body votes for the idea with enthusiasm. It wakes in the ink black and conducts an audit of your fears. You learn to place your busiest thoughts on a mental chair and tell them to sit quietly until morning. They don't, but the ritual helps. Faith visits in practical clothes. Not only the scripted prayers, the formal Latin murmured by a priest who can pronounce your name better than your neighbors do, but the everyday sacrament of doing the next necessary thing, mending hose, darning resolve, counting coins like parables. You hold your knife and feel what it is. Not destiny, not a character trait, just metal that would rather be a plowshare. The thought makes you kinder to yourself for a heartbeat. Then the cough resumes its argument, and you promise lungs a warmer scarf tomorrow. The day takes smaller bites now. Morning is a slow decision. Noon is an errand performed by habit. Dusk is a negotiation with blankets. You add a thin shirt beneath the thick one and discover the arithmetic of layers. 2 poor pieces can vote themselves into a decent one. Your shoes, tallowed and chastened, remember their choreography even on frozen ruts. The street gives you a compliment in the form of not caring where you place your feet. Faith and fatigue bargain over your temper. You find yourself shorter with the boy who splashes slops, kinder to the old woman whose basket argues with her back. You apologize to a door you bump with your hip. The door accepts. In the square, a friar talks about charity with the cheerful menace of a man who knows where you live. You drop a penny into the alms box mostly to bribe your own conscience into silence. It works until supper, at which point your conscience remembers it can also discuss onions. You keep your promises to the body because the body writes performance reviews. Wash more often than the season recommends, even if the water feels like a grudge. Keep your feet dry even if it means looking like you care about your feet. Stretch the way the carter stretches a horse's neck before harness. Quiet, deliberate, not inviting witnesses. You reroute your stalking when your breath fogs too eagerly. Mist is a tattletale with an ant on every corner. You nest your knife under cloth that doesn't print its outline. The cord sleeps doubled so it won't kink its opinion at the wrong instant. Sleep, when it comes, is a guest with conditions. You coax it with the same stories you use on yourself during the second sleep watch. You are a shelf in a cool pantry. You are a bench in a nave where dust is a religion. You are a small field after harvest, with nothing left for crows to discover. Sometimes the stories work. Sometimes the cough edits them. Sometimes a neighbor's laugh lifts a memory you hoped had retired. On better nights you drift the way boats drift when they've agreed with the river about destination. On worse nights you count cracks and decide to name them later. Once, in the worst of the cold, you step into a church not for sanctuary, but for temperature. The candles make little suns. The stone holds an older season. A woman at the altar whispers through her fingers. A man nods toward a saint who has seen more than you and is still patient. You leave a coin you can't spare because you've learned that regret is heavier when carried on an empty stomach. The door gives back the outdoor, and the air greets you with its usual honesty. You breathe it anyway. Your plan learns winter manners. You shorten routes, because long ones invite weather to join the conversation. You pick corners where wind loses interest. You aim for places with ovens, bakers, potters, where a man can be near heat without auditioning. You avoid the river after dusk, because cold water negotiates badly. You note which watchmen scowl out of principle, and which scowl because their toes are cold. The second kind can be bought with small charities of information and sympathy that cost you nothing you can't spare. Fatigue does one more trick. It makes guilt louder. You see the target rub his hands, red with chill and power, and you feel a word in your chest that wants to be prayer. Not for him. For not becoming a shape you can't recognize. Faith answers with the practical again. Bring the plan down to the size of a hallway. Keep your story small. Make no room for a clerk's flourish. Save tenderness for where it will live. A landlady's posset. A boy who learns to carry his pail without sloshing. A stray dog who decides you are not tonight's curriculum. When you bank the fire, you think of the old rumor that curfew means cover the fire. Couvre-feu. The household lid lowered against mischief. You lower yours and listen to the room soften. The lavender sachet has stopped trying to fix everything. It just keeps you company. Faith, fatigue, hunger, cough. They don't leave. They learn to share the bench. You learn to breathe without promising tomorrow anything you can't deliver. Targets learn, or rather, they pay someone to learn for them. After enough roomers stroll past their shutters, the important begin to wear the city like armor, and sometimes they wear actual armor under the city. You sense it the first time your timing meets a shrug. The man you have patterned for days suddenly abandons his favorite lane, turns his back on his favorite baker, and invents an errand that refuses to explain itself. Your map sighs, folds, and becomes a paper hat. Mainstream fact to brace your patience. By the late Middle Ages, concealed protection wasn't rare among men with coin and enemies. A light mail shirt under wool, a brigandine, jack of plates, that looks like a stylish doublet but rattles like a pocket full of worry, a secret coif beneath a cap. These lived under clothes the way caution lives under titles. Even a well-quilted jack eats a dagger thrust the way thick bread eats stew. Your rondel still matters, but now it must negotiate with hardware. Security is a choreography written by two people who dislike each other. Your man begins to swap routes the way a gambler swaps stories. Monday he skims the market's sunny edge. Tuesday he chooses the butcher's lane where elbows already have tenure. Wednesday he reenacts a pilgrimage along every puddle that owns the street. Each detour is a test. Each test is for you. He starts leaving a few minutes late, or early, or not at all, and a boy with a cap too new lingers by his door exactly when you think he'll appear. You add the boy to your ledger and label him weather vane. He points. You wait. Household discipline grows teeth. The doorman who once traded gossip for a grin now trades silence for coin and looks you over like a bolt that doesn't belong in the door. Servants stop drifting in pairs and begin to move in little jobs, each carrying a purpose that makes loitering a misdemeanor. You watch as a package leaves the back stair in the hands of a lad who isn't anyone, and then arrives by a different door in the hands of a man who is everyone. Decoys don't need faces if they have errands. He also learns the trick you hoped he wouldn't. Borrowing bodies. A cousin or clerk now walks in his hat and cloak, the brim set to the same angle of arrogance, the stride rehearsed until it looks accidental. You nearly follow the costume into a cul-de-sac that has always loved the sound of trouble. Only the shoes save you. The cousin lifts his feet like he was born on carpets. Your man scuffs. You allow yourself a smile that doesn't use teeth. Quirky tidbit, jingling in with a wink. Some household stitched small hawk bells into a master's hem or girdle. Not as fashion, but as accidental alibi and alarm. If the bell's rhythm doesn't match the man, someone notices. And if hands get too familiar in a crowd, they get music. Not common everywhere, not foolproof anywhere, but clever enough that your fingers learn modesty a second time. Inside the rooms you can't see, they practice countersigns. A knock that used to be a rhythm becomes a conversation. The porter asks a question and expects the wrong answer on purpose. The right answer is the counter. Even servants you counted as bored now carry short lists of names they will pretend not to know. Historians still argue whether such household codes were truly systematic in towns or mostly ad hoc, individual houses inventing rituals out of habit and fear. From your side of the door, habit and fear are as good as systems. On the street, he acquires furniture with legs. A pair of men not quite guards and not quite friends orbit him at a distance that reads as coincidence to anyone without a stake in the day. One shows interest in shoes he cannot afford. The other studies pigeons with the intensity of a philosopher. Their job isn't to fight. It's to look at space so hard it forgets how to be inviting. You test the gap between them at a market stall and find the air already owned. He also purchases charity. The beggar at the corner, who used to sing hunger in C major, now sings loyalty in a key your knife dislikes. A penny buys a voice, a loaf buys a choir. The beggar sees you every day and forgets you, until the day he doesn't. That's the day he raises a hand not to ask but to name. You practice being smoke. Smoke that doesn't sting. Smoke that does not become a story. Your man's cloak changes weight on cold mornings. It doesn't drape, it argues. The outline beneath says plates, not pudding. When he sits, he prefers benches with backs that keep knives from having opinions. When he stands, he keeps his left shoulder to timber. All this would be admirable if it weren't personally inconvenient. You try to build a plan inside his plan and find only corners with teeth. And messages. All messages now taste of vinegar. Once in a while, a clerk leaves a scrap on a sill. 3 dots, a cross, a crooked S. You consider ciphers. Love that busy world of substitutions and saints that also look like letters. And then you fall out of love because you're not here to read histories. You're here not to be in one. He carries a rosary that's heavier than devotion explains. You suspect a lead weight in a pouch, a comfort against blades and ghosts. You move your own rosary-less hand and decide this is not the morning to invent religion. He turns doorways into arguments. The latch that squealed last week now squeals louder, deliberately ungreased, a noise that declares visitors. The floorboard near the threshold remains unfixed because it's a doorbell that doesn't need a boy. Keys multiply. You hear them before you see them, a ring like a small grammar lesson. The steward wears them at his belt. The housekeeper wears a chatelaine of little tools and virtue. The scullion wears nothing but opinions. You audit the soundscapes of entry and decide half your plan depends on wax and luck, and no one coughing at the wrong time. Once, you try for an early morning approach, banking on fog and neighbors' indifference. He answers the door with a cruel smile, cap down, shoulders relaxed, and a short-sleeved jack under his gown that says, "Not today." He steps aside to reveal a man you have never seen, but whose eyes have been waiting for you since last week. You ask the street to invent a reason for your presence. The street provides. You become a man selling onions to people who do not eat onions before prime. You sell none. You also do not die. Consider the morning a success. Your target learns speechcraft too. In the square, he adopts a tone that buys him space. "Friend," he says to a watchman, and the word arrives with a penny and a promise. "Master," he says to a guildsman, and the word arrives with tomorrow's favor. "Father," he says to a priest, and the word arrives with a confession that omits nouns. He greases the city with pronouns. You revise your budget. You can't outspend pronouns. He begins to look up at windows that do not belong to you. You follow his gaze and find curtains that think they are eyelids. You mark which shutters breathe less, which have the tidy gap of people who expect to watch. Crow feet gather on the corners of your map. Your shoes, choreographed and loyal, still prefer alleys with dogs. Dogs prefer collars with names. The dogs learn you. You learn the dogs. Everyone is tired of the curriculum. So you adjust. You shrink the plan until it can hide in a cuff. You stop looking for a perfect corner and start looking for a forgettable one. You refuse the theater, the pageant cart, the dais step, the door with an audience. You choose the places where a man's attention turns inward. Stepping off a curb, leaning to retie a lace. Ducking a low lintel he has stopped respecting. Iron does not blink, men do. You will need that blink, and you will need the city to be looking somewhere else when it happens. Historians still argue whether paranoid routines like these were common, the preserve of the very rich, or mostly the invention of chroniclers who love making caution look clever. From where you stand, inside a week of failed timings and rattling cloaks, paranoia is simply what people call learning when they don't plan to applaud. Your man has read the playbook, yes. He's also underlined passages and written "see me" in the margins. You close your own notebook and write one word on the cover. Smaller. There's a version of your trade that wears discipline like iron under silk. You hear about it in taverns where sailors mix rumor with salt, and in cloisters where scribes copy fear in tidy hands. The Fida, the devoted ones, who serve the Nizari Ismailis, whose fortresses stitch themselves into Persia's mountains like careful embroidery. Where you count curfews and hinge squeaks, they count years. Where you court luck, they court symbols. You move through the city like steam. They walk into daylight and place a dagger where a message needs legs. Mainstream fact to set the stage before the story runs ahead. Beginning in the late 11th century, the Nizari community under Hassani Saba built a network of strongholds, Alamut most famous among them, and practiced a politics of survival at the edge of empires. Their Fida entered enemy circles with patience, sometimes as servants or students, and killed high officials in public to maximize effect. Mongols will later grind Alamut down in 1256, but for generations the name alone moves viziers to hire extra sleep. You don't have a fortress. You have a rented room with lavender. They had libraries, storehouses, terraced gardens, codes, and time. Their methods make sense if you accept their map. You try to avoid witnesses. They require them. You hide cause. They write it in dagger-sized letters you can read from the back pew. You build a life around surviving the hour after. For many Fida, there is no after to budget for. Success often ends in certain death, by guards, by the sacrificial geometry of the mission, by staying with the target like a punctuation mark no one can ignore. Where your shoes practice the choreography of leaving, theirs rehearse the final bow. You listen to a pilgrim, half scholar, half wind, tell of how a Fida once placed a knife on a prince's pillow while the man slept, a note that read like thunder without the rain. Quirky tidbit, sharp and possibly apocryphal. Rulers across the region retold stories of waking to find a dagger stuck beside their bed, or a poisoned sweet replaced at the last moment with a warning. The lesson was simple and cost-effective. We can, and today we are choosing not to. Whether every tale happened hardly matters. The tales happen to fear, and fear circulates faster than fact. Targets on their list were not street-level quarrels. Think viziers whose signatures turned armies, judges whose rulings rewrote loyalty, commanders whose habits carried provinces in their pockets. Nizam al-Mulk, the great Seljuk vizier, dies in 1092, and historians still argue whether a Fida's blade found him in a scholar's disguise or whether courtly politics nearer to home arranged the end and hired rumor as its press agent. Your own patron would like that ambiguity. It makes caution look devout and blame look sophisticated. Training, so the stories go, looked nothing like your improvisational college of alleyways. Years in place. Lives built under assumed loyalty. Scripture memorized hard enough to speak at speed if someone tested you. Languages dressed to pass customs officers in the mind. Some accounts insist on intoxicants as initiation. Other scholars light their lamps and shake their heads. Historians still argue whether hashish sat at the center of this world or merely at the edge of other people's imaginations and etymologies. The Arabic nouns are complicated, the enemies opportunistic, and Marco Polo a wonderful novelist. You can taste why rulers feared them. Because the fida didn't need curfew's permission. They needed a moment of conviction and a crowd to witness. Mass was not protection, but stage. Procession was not obstacle, but choreography. Where you saw scaffolding at St. Mildred's and muttered, "Not today," a fida would see the same scaffold and think, "Excellent stairs." You use kitchens for listening. They used kitchens for living, long enough to ladle soup as if born to it. When the day arrived, the act wrote itself loudly and briefly. The point was not just an ending. It was a sentence that ran in other people's heads for years. The cost, though, that's what tugs at your sleeve. Imagine your lavender sachet replaced by a creed you will never put down. Imagine that every kindness you offer the neighbors is pinned to an hourglass turned by someone else's hand. Their success rate measured differently. Your survival was not their metric. The mission completed when the message landed, not when the messenger returned for compliments. They lived with after already spent, and spent wisely, but still spent. Another fringe glint in the heap of tales. Some chroniclers claim fida sometimes waited beside their target for days, in the posture of hired guards, even accompanying him to prayer, stalling until symbol and certainty aligned. Whether or not that picture is frequent or rare, the strategic genius is clear. The closer you are, the smaller the math. Your own practice stays arm's length and hates math. Theirs prefers inches and memorizes it. Politics wrapped all of it. The Nizari did not exist in a vacuum, but in a valley ringed by Seljuks, later by Crusader states and Ayyubids, then by Mongols who did not care for nuance. Alliances shifted like river light. There are records of truces, ransoms, even arrangements where a would-be target becomes a payer of protection. Call it tribute. Call it diplomacy. Call it what you like so long as it prevents funerals. You memorized watch routes. Alamut scribes memorized seasons, grain stores, letters, names. And yet, for everything that sounds surgical, the sources are noisy. Chronicles praise, denounce, exaggerate. Travelers collect spice and scandal with equal zeal. A fida becomes a character in a genre. The genre teaches rulers how to fear and teaches enemies how to accuse. Historians still argue how many killings were truly theirs, how many were draped in their cloak by convenient rumor, and how many belonged to ordinary knives later adopted by extraordinary stories. You live in that uncertainty too, every time a bad oyster becomes a political speech. You try on their shoes in your imagination and find they don't fit. Not because their feet were nobler, but because the path is different. You count exits. They count witnesses. You choreograph survival. They choreographed memory. You practice smallness. They practiced spectacle. Each method has a city that rewards it. Your city feeds on clerks and scaffolds and bedtime scolds. Theirs fed, for a time, on the mathematics of terror made neat. If there's a lesson you can borrow without moving to a mountain, it's discipline wrapped around patience. The way they let years do what your hours try to do. The way a plan can be grown like a terrace, stone by stone, irrigated with silence, until gravity is your employee. You can't afford their visible convictions, but you can afford to make your map tighter, your timing cleaner, your tools even duller to the eye. The message you write tonight should arrive where it's meant to and leave no author. A final, inconvenient truth. Even empires that shake one day may grind you the next. Hulagu's men climb Alamut steps, and a famous library becomes ash and a footnote. A discipline that carved dread into officials' calendars meets a discipline that carves fortresses into memory. Your own rented room, lavender and all, could vanish on a different kind of wind. You walk back into your night with a new humility. There is a version of this job that makes history by refusing to survive it. You will not copy that paragraph. You will steal precisely one sentence. Patience is sharper than steel when held correctly. Your shoes laugh quietly, remembering their choreography. Your hand finds the knife that doesn't tell stories. The city waits to see which grammar you choose. Your ledger fills with endings that refuse to pick a cause. Streets are good at assigning authorship, who swung, who shouted, who ran. But death in this century owns a wider vocabulary. Men collapse in feasts where the pepper was enthusiastic. Women fade after a night air that hated lungs. A clerk dies with a quill poised like a witness who won't testify. Your trade collects rumors the way a tanner collects smells, permanently. Every sudden end tries to enroll you as a footnote, even when you were busy arguing with your shoes somewhere else. Mainstream fact to pin to the page before the whispers smudge it. Coroner's rolls in medieval England, from the 13th century onward, record many sudden or accidental deaths, falls, drownings, cart mishaps, tavern fights with improvised weapons, far outnumbering tidy poisonings. People lived near ladders, water, and gravity. Ladders, water, and gravity kept excellent attendance. If a man slips on a stair after 2 mugs of ale and a poor opinion of steps, the law may mourn him and fine the neighborhood for not guarding its hazards. The Chronicle might instead prefer a story with wicked hands and tidy morals. Your job, then, is to avoid being the nearest wicked hands. You hear 3 versions of the same afternoon. Version 1. A merchant, fat with pepper, clutches his throat and dies while the table argues about cinnamon. Version 2. The merchant's rival hired a blade and disguised him as a baker's boy. The blade was you. The cinnamon was theater. Version 3. The merchant died of a fever that started yesterday. And the cinnamon is innocent except in the matter of sneezes. Truth walks through the room like a cat and leaves with no one's permission. Mistaken identity stalks you like a cousin with your face. A man in your hood color, with your late but polite gait, jostles the wrong shoulder and bleeds for it in a lane that still owes you rent in patience. For a week, half the ward decides you're the jostler. The other half decides you're his ghost. You discover the civic importance of millers. Flour dust on a hood proves a life you can name. You dust yourself conspicuously near sacks, buy a heel of bread you don't want, and let witnesses assemble you into harmless. Your lavender sachet throws a small, fragrant alibi in for free. Quirky tidbit that belongs on the edge of a legal parchment. In medieval English law, a deodand could be levied on an object that caused a death. The cart, the boat, sometimes even the pig. Its value forfeited to God, that is, to the crown, because the thing had misbehaved. The law sometimes blamed ladders with a better paper trail than it blamed men. You file this under good news and don't become the object. Then come the legendary deaths whose authorship was auctioned to rumor. A royal captive disappears from the record, and a century later, a chronicler, warm by a candle, certain in his adjectives, decides murder was theatrical and specific. A prince dies at a convenient moment, and suddenly every cup in the kingdom contains intention. Historians still argue whether King John died of dysentery or peaches, whether Edward II was murdered in 1327 or lived longer in shadow, whether this bishop's stomachache was shellfish or statecraft. You learn to keep peaches out of your shopping basket until the mood passes. Botched strikes are their own genre. A blade that meant silence catches mail hidden under wool and rings a confession. A push meant to be a stumble becomes a street theater with a chorus that knows only one word. A bolt released in certainty meets a gust of wind that didn't receive your script. You felt the physics complain in your wrist, the rondelle hitting quilted jack like a sermon hitting sleep. Afterwards, the city writes the ending it prefers. Either you were never there, or you were everywhere. Your shoes, choreographed and loyal, insist they were practicing innocence at the other end of the map. Shoes are rarely called as witnesses. You start to recognize the sound of a rumor being born. It's a hush pretending to be silence, a circle closing like a fist, a voice saying, "I was told by someone who knows." Rumor needs diet and exercise, markets provide both. You starve it by refusing to be interesting. You exercise it towards someone else by talking loudly about onions or the price of salt. If forced into a conversation, you prefer recipe gossip. Recipes are safe because they kill no one except appetites. The kitchen workers you befriended with scrub brush diplomacy become your best defense. That one always asks about stew, couldn't poison a spoon. Bodies tell stories, but they don't always tell them on time. A fever runs through the ward. A child coughs herself thin. A respected alderman puts a hand to his side at none and fails to stand at vespers. Someone remembers seeing you near him last week. Someone remembers you asking directions. Someone decides direction is a metaphor for motive. You gather up everything that makes you ordinary. Your bundle of sticks, your dusted hood, your copper coins that smell like a hard day, and carry them through the market like a liturgy. The liturgy's refrain. This person belongs to errands, not epilogues. Crowds see look-alikes the way night watch see shadows. Twice where there was one, not at all where there were two. A clerk you've never met wears your posture. A cousin you never had borrows your sigh. You return to the same stall twice a day for 3 days, buying ridiculous quantities of the same dull onions, so that a half-dozen people will remember you being aggressively elsewhere. You let the baker complain that you tapped the counter 3 times for luck. You now tap 3 times everywhere, irritated but loyal to your alibi. Sometimes the rumor points at you from the mouth of a priest who has heard 10 confessions shaped like stories and one shaped like revenge. Sometimes it points from the bench of a magistrate who needs a narrative that ends before dinner. You practice the face that says, "I am grateful to be dismissed." You bring the watchman a loaf, never coin, and discuss his chilblains like they are politics. You help a cooper roll a cask, loudly, on the day the alderman's nephew thinks he saw you near a window. People love witnesses who grunt at barrels. They distrust witnesses who appear only at endings. A city also misreads signs it wrote itself. A black hood means plague pit in one quarter, penance in another, and fashion in a third. Your plain liripipe takes on whatever meaning the street is tired enough to give it. You rotate colors you hate, mud, ash, unripe pear, until even rumor can't keep up with your mediocrity. The lavender sachet, once a kindness, becomes a tactic. People remember pleasant smells badly. All this uncertainty feeds the chronicles the way rivers feed mills. Some monk, diligent and lovely, will copy the year's notable ends into a book that winces at ambiguity. A line here. A certain man, struck down at table by wicked contrivance. A line there. A magistrate perished suddenly. To the city's sadness and the joy of some. Your name, if you achieve immortality, will be a certain man. You prefer that man with the onions. Historians still argue whether towns truly pulsed with hired knives behind every banner, or whether the genre of secret death simply pays better attention in hindsight. You live in the argument's footnotes, where weather, stairs, oysters, mail under wool, and men with inconvenient hearts do their quiet arithmetic. Your survival depends on being a terrible fit for other people's adjectives. Night folds itself over the roofs. A bell corrects the hour. You check your kit, knife honest, cord asleep, wax patient, and your shoes remember their choreography with a sigh. Tomorrow will ask for a decision in a space the width of a blink. Tonight you file rumor where it belongs. Not as truth. Not as verdict, but as weather. You let it rain elsewhere. You bank the fire with the curfew lid and lie back. Lavender, rue, onion, tallow, your small saints. Not heroes, not footnotes. Just a city sense that decide, for a few hours, to let you become uninteresting again. The city gives you one more inch of timing and calls it mercy. You don't waste it. Morning learns to be noon without telling anyone. Your target walks with yesterday's confidence and today's cloak. The two men who orbit him drift a little wider, like geese that have agreed to quarrel later. You don't follow so much as occur. You re-enter the choreography no one clapped for. Ordinary step, ordinary breath, a gaze that belongs to errands, not epilogues. You've been hunting a blink, and Blink's live where lintels are low. He cuts down the lane behind St. Mildred's, scaffolding still there, ropes newly obedient, and reaches a tradesman's door with the sort of threshold that thinks highly of toes. The doorman is inside. The street, for 9 heartbeats, is a room you recognize. Left shoulder to timber, right hand to latch. Hat brim at arrogance. The two shadows who mind him are delayed by a cart that suddenly believes in philosophy. The blink happens. He ducks the lintel and looks down instead of back. Your hand learns forward because you taught it forward. Mainstream fact lands like a bell you've counted on all along. Many townhouses put their front rooms hard to the street, but service entries and shop doors sat in narrow courts where sound traveled late and fast. Thresholds were tall, short, and treacherous by law's indifference, not malice. Builders loved variation. Knives hate it, and love it, and must live with it. Your rondel clears cloth and air. The rope on the scaffolding creaks like a witness trying to decide if it is devout. You step, you measure, you choose. Steel is a sentence that ends loudly. Hands can make it look like weather, but only if the weather signs a confession. He leans. The city inhales. Your point finds the quilted truth under his gown, a jack that eats confidence and returns indigestion. You could try again. You do not. Physics has delivered its review. Not today. You convert momentum into clumsiness, shoulder yourself into the door jamb, mutter something about load-bearing saints, and let the moment close without you. The two shadows arrive with expressions that mean to be memorable. You give them the gift of boredom and a bundle of kindling you have been carrying since yesterday, as if it were a sacrament. You become a man who obstructs himself. You become a man who should look where he's going. You become a man with onions in his pocket because rumor demands a reprise. The first shadow curses the cart. The second interviews the air. Your target rubs a shoulder that will be sore at vespers and grateful by matins. The city exhales, disappointed in its lack of drama. Quirky tidbit flickers as you step away. Nailed above the tradesman's door is a little lead token stamped with a hand. Some houses hang touch pieces, or amulets against ill luck. A practice neither universal nor rare, but handy for giving fear something small to do. You tap the lintel twice in a private superstition you've earned the right to invent. Fear accepts the tip. You do not run. You diminish. Pace returns to prose, shoulders find their middle altitude, and your knife learns invisibility under cloth as if it had paid tuition. The street resumes its chores with the offended dignity of people deprived of a story. Somewhere a bell practices its vowels. A dog reconsiders your biography and decides it prefers sausages. Historians still argue whether assassinations in town life were truly frequent, or whether chronicles amplified a handful into a genre, the way storm years become the age of storms. Your feet vote for amplification. Your lungs vote for leaving. You buy a heel of bread from the nearest mouth that can sell it, and eat with the devotion of a man who nearly owed the clerk at court a signature. The crust is argumentative. Your teeth file a complaint, and then withdraw it. You keep moving, because movement is what turns a narrow escape into a tedious afternoon. The scapular of lavender at your chest forgives the sweat you've asked it to forgive all week. There is a confession in you, but it doesn't belong to any priest yet. You almost wrote yourself into a plank that doesn't need more names. The plan shrank until it fit inside a cuff, and even there the city asked for a fee. You wanted a clean physics. The world offered padded jacks and men who can be late on purpose. So you choose the thing your trade despises and your lungs adore. You choose to make no headline, no rumor, no clerk's flourish. You choose to let the ledger of attempts contain one line only you can read. Mainstream memory taps your shoulder again. Sanctuary exists, yes. Church porches where law has to knock politely. But mercy isn't a building. It's a habit you practice toward yourself so you don't turn into the sort of person who walks only with knives. You've stood in porches, counted bells, negotiated curfews, threaded kitchens, and bribed latches with wax. You've made a profession of subtraction. Tonight you subtract yourself a little more thoroughly. By dusk, the square rehearses tomorrow as usual. Someone hangs a new banner that will tangle. Someone tells a story that will tangle worse. You lean against a pillar and look like a man who got the price of salt wrong. The watchman you have not bothered successfully for a week nods to you as if you were a bench. You accept the promotion. You belong to errands again. When you reach the room with the straw mattress and the crack in the plaster shaped like a river, you lay your kit out for a ceremony with no witnesses. The rondel gets cleaned, not because it required it, but because dignity is a habit. The cord curls into humility. The wax bites the edge of your thumbnail and forgives you. You bank the fire with the curfew lid, the old French in its iron bones. Couvre-feu, cover the flame, reminding you that some dangers accept lids and some do not. You didn't strike. You didn't vanish. You did the third thing your trade rarely brags about. You refused to turn a crowded city into a courtroom that would learn your forehead by heart. You will sleep because you practiced not being interesting. The city will sleep because it has other villains scheduled. If your patron knocks tomorrow, you will be elsewhere, buying onions you don't need and being the wrong man in the right shoes. The job still sucks. The night is still kind, in the quiet way that never makes the chronicles. Let the street grow soft again. Let the doors remember how to be wood and not arguments. In this slower air, your breath lengthens and rounds its edges. Each inhale a small tide, each exhale a shoreline smoothing itself after footsteps. The scaffolding fades back into lines and shadows. The watchman's call becomes a faraway lullaby. Even the bells choose their gentlest vowels. You wander the city the way drowse wanders a room, unhurried, a little generous, willing to forgive corners for being corners. Imagine the stones warming from within, as if they kept a pocket of last summer beneath the dust. Imagine windows becoming stars at a human height, and shutters blinking one by one into sleep. The lavender at your chest is just a fragrance now, not a tactic. The knife is just metal, clean and quiet, an old tool resting where old tools rest. Let your steps grow wider apart until step and step are nothing but the suggestion of walking. Linger near the bakery that remembers morning before anyone else does. Stand under the signboards that creak like familiar names. Let the market's tables turn into bare planks, and then into lines, and then into nothing you need to count. If a rumor passes, it doesn't recognize you. If a memory looks up, it smiles and looks back down. Think of the river flattening into a sheet of dark silk, easy and uncomplaining, carrying the moon as if the moon were light enough to pocket. Think of door latches that no longer test you, and of thresholds that lift their toes so your shins won't. Think of the city as a choir after the last note, mouths closed, lungs still, the harmony lingering without anyone having to hold it up. Now let your own thoughts choose the shorter words, the kinder ones, the ones that arrive already half asleep. You did enough. And then you did a little less, and the world permitted it. Lean back. Breathe. Let the night finish its sentence softly.